Great to see you in reality rather than as a internet avatar. Your thoughts have been in mine, or your voice has been in my head for the past 6 months.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a pleasure to meet you. I don't know if you saw, but I tweeted about what you wrote.
Yes, thank you very much for
yeah,
sharing.
I thought it was excellent. I thought it was some excellent work, excellent commentary, excellent critique. Really well done. Deeply appreciative of that kind of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the reason I write these, I mean, one of my motivations, besides the fact that I love them, is that it's high abstract stuff,
Yeah.
and so I always have to go through your videos a couple times to get it. And so if I write about it, you know, I'll absorb it. I'll be able to, you know, I'll be able to keep it with me. Whereas if I just listen to it like while I'm washing the dishes or something like that, it'll just feel like water going through my brain, and I'll miss a lot of the central concepts.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, that's the elaborative strategy, and that is the way to deeply understand something, is to try and have a generative response to it, where you actually write about it, wrestle with it. That's why I deeply appreciate when people have watch parties about the video, talking and discussing with each other.
Yeah, the future thinker guys. Yeah.
Yeah, that's you know, that's how I would prefer. That's how I prefer the videos would be watched. That they're not just watched, like you say, with somebody riding on their bicycle, just listening to me in a monologic fashion. But if they got, and I've got to attend one of those. There's a city near me, Kingston. I'm in Toronto. It's about 2.5 hours away by drive, and they're in a movie theater. They're showing the video series.
Oh right, yeah.
And so I got to actually go out there and participate in you know, watching with these people and then doing discussion and live Q&A with them. That was just such a wonderful experience. That is really how I would like the videos to be watched, because yeah, they're not intended to be monologic. I mean, obviously I have to present them that way because I'm by myself. But yeah, very much what you're doing is deeply appreciated. Deeply appreciated.
Thank you. And it's what you're doing is I appreciate very much on the level that you are a university professor, but you're also reaching out to talk to the people in a sense. If that makes sense. So it seems to me like there's just two worlds, right? There's academia, and then there's this other kind of world, and they seem kind of separate, and you're kind of bridging those two worlds.
Yeah, very, very much so. That's very much what I'm trying to do. I'm very much. I think that I don't want to be disrespectful to my academic home, because the University of Toronto treats me extremely well, and I'm deeply appreciative for that. So take that into consideration when I say I don't think the academic world is going to be the place where we come up with the solutions to the meaning crisis. I think academic work has a role in that, but it is not going to be the locus where the response to the meaning crisis is going to be found. So bridging this stuff out and getting the kind of stuff that's happening right now between you and I, that's the place where it's going to happen. And so that was the intent of the work that I tried to do. It was motivated by that deep belief that the academic world is too insulated, and too sort of spun up in just propositional exchange for doing what's needed to be done, what needs to be done.
Yeah, there's almost, even though this is online stuff, it's almost more like, I almost feel like myself. I haven't been an academic for a long, I mean, I haven't ever really been an academic, but it's almost like a street kind of writing, less than an academic kind of writing, what I'm doing. Like I'm translating stuff that you're doing in a sense, in a way that I can understand it, to communicate to people. And this is kind of making me a student again. So I'm kind of going back into the academia, and I'm like taking notes, and so it's sort of extending, I think for a lot of people, also extending our learning process, you know, outside of the confines of
that's
whatever monopolies of learning there are, right?
That's what one woman, when I went to this meetup, the watch party, in Kingston, she actually said, "Yeah, thank you for bringing the university to us and
Yeah,
bringing
exactly.
learning back to us." So I'm glad you feel that, because that's actually one of the goals of what I'm trying to do with my work.
I have a list of questions for you.
Mhm.
One of the big ones I have is this question about what is a religion that is not a religion.
Yeah, yeah,
And the reason it's kind of an important question to me is because um, I've been a practicing Buddhist in a formal sense since my
yeah,
20s.
yeah.
I kind of at one point decided, okay, and there's been times where I haven't really liked the label, and I wouldn't want to identify myself with that, and other times where I thought it was important to do that.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So I've fluctuated in my life between feeling that I'm a formal Buddhist and not a Buddhist.
Yeah.
So anyway, I want to just get your view on that whole thing, um, and my fear is a religion that's not a religion is sort of still a religion or
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a sense in which um, by deliberately and explicitly using a contradictory statement, I'm trying to be engage in what I call serious play, right? I'm trying to be provocative rather than give a definitive declaration. Two things I want to do. I wanted to thank you for all the commentary and excellent critique you do of my work. It's really good. And I also wanted to let you know that earlier this morning, I was just actually talking to Jordan Hall explicitly about this question. We were doing some further work on it. He gave me permission to mention any of the ideas that we talked about there. So let me try and answer that question again with the understanding that, this is in conversation with Chris, Master Pietro, a deep conversation with Jordan Hall. It's very important for me to people always know the collaborative cohort that that I'm working with.
yeah.
And so I just want to make that clear to your viewers. So one of the things I'm trying to say is first of all, that part of it emerged out of a problem that I see. A problem that I see is the following. And I have arguments for each point that I want to make. So if you want to go back and unpack any one point I'm going to make argumentatively, I'm prepared to do that. But
Okay.
I'm going to try and answer your question more schematically, overarching right now.
Mhm.
I think something like religio, for reasons I articulate, is inevitable to human beings. This sense of a participatory connectedness to ourselves, to each other, to the world, that isn't just propositional. It's deeply embodied. It's deeply enacted, and that we need to not only have that happening, we need to be able to. How do I want to put it? We need to be able to reliably activate it, celebrate it, accentuate it, develop it. It has a developmental, aspirational drive to it, and we get a kind of deep existential and motivational, even emotional reward from engaging with and celebrating our religio. In that sense, it's inevitable to us because I think it's so central to our cognitive agency. So we need that. And I mean, you've seen the series. There's a long argument for this in terms of relevance, realization, etc. So I'm going to take that as a premise for what I'm now going to say. So we need something. We need a set. We need sets of practices. Ecologies of psychotechnologies, as I put it, for doing that, for activating and accentuating and aspirating our religio in reliable developmental ways. The
Okay.
problem.
Well, I just want to stop and say that the question I have then is, why do we not keep the actual traditions we have and reform them rather than just start from scratch? And isn't there a danger there in a sort of blank slate kind of ideology? Yeah.
Totally. And so I'll address both of those. So now to the next point is exactly where it's a perfect segue. So thank you. So what's the problematic about that? Well, the problematic I see for that, and there's, I think, demographic evidence to support this with the rise of the nuns and the rise of sort of pervasive background, culturally accepted sort of nihilism and cynicism, is that the traditional religious forms are not working for many people. And I think part of that, this is not meant to be an exhaustive explanation, but I think part of that is the psychotechnologies, we can't unlearn a lot of the psychotechnologies and practices, and the way they've transformed our consciousness and cognition. But what many people can no longer adhere to, and I'm playing with that term of both believe and connect to, right? What they can no longer adhere to is the axial age two worlds mythology that sort of legitimated and valorized and provided institutions and guides for this for most people.
Oh, great. I have another question for you, if I can jump in again. If you don't mind, related to that. So, I've said, I've sort of, in a sense, asked the question about tradition. But also, in another way, I'm very sympathetic to you, because whenever I talk to Christians, they seem to think that their way is the only way. And it seems almost all pervasive with Christians. And it's probably the same with people who are Islamic or most of the major, it's not everybody, but also that there is an orthodox way of doing things, and there's no sort of boundaries between those, no possibility for a Christian to meditate or that's just, are you feeling my sort of struggle with all this, or?
Yeah, I am. I want to, let me reply to that and then also finish the larger point I was making. I'll try to keep the nesting clear for people. I definitely have met those people. As you may know, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family background. And so I know very deeply from the inside what you're talking about. Of course, I've met Christians who are much more open and exploratory, and I get into excellent conversations with them.
Sure.
I should also point out that I have met in deep conversation even Buddhists who also come to that place, that this is ultimately the only way.
Right. Me too.
So,
agreed.
So I don't want to pin this to any one particular religion. I find this as a sort of perennial problem with the religions. So if we agree that there's that sort of institutional sort of constraint, I think there's also an epistemic constraint in that the two worlds view, and there's all kinds of axial variations on it. It can be heaven and earth, it can be nirvana, samsara, it can be the promised land and Egypt. Like there's all kinds of mythological representations of this, and the variation is part of why that mythology was precisely so powerfully successful. Is it was capable of a kind of evolution that gave it sustaining presence. But nevertheless, that two worlds grammar, right, is largely, and again, I have an argument out there for this, I'm just gesturing towards it, it's largely deeply incompatible with the scientific worldview. And then, and you have to do more with the scientific, it's a scientific worldview, not just science, right? And this is a Heideggerian point. It has permeated our cultural grammar. It surrounds us with our technology, right? People who say, well, I reject the scientific worldview, while they're using all of this technology and moving around and using all these psychotechnologies like graphing and, and mathematical equations for understanding reality. This is Heidegger's point, right? It is deep, it is soaked deep into us, the scientific worldview. Sure. Right?
But is a scientific worldview incompatible with the traditional religious worldview? Is that?
Well, now that's a better question, right? And than the way I posed it. What I want to say is, and this overlaps with your point about a kind of conservatism in the institutions. If the religious tradition is identified with that axial age two-world grammar, I think that renders it incapable of reconciliation with the scientific worldview.
Okay, that's great.
Now, and I think you can see traditions of orthodoxy that have basically made that identification sacrosanct. Now, I want to step back and be fair. There are lots of Christians I am talking to publicly right now. Mary Cohen, Paul Vanderklay, J.P. Marceau, right? Who are willing to pull those apart and say, yes, we want to somehow change the ontology of Christianity and get it free from the axial age. So again, I want to be fair, but what I'm saying is, in general, for most people looking at the traditions, and I think with a fair degree of legitimacy, they are being told from within these traditions that axial age mythology and the religious tradition are deeply identifiable together. That's the kind of orthodoxy. And I think as long as that identification is in place, and I mean this also for Buddhism too.
Yeah,
I think you can, that's why.
No, you're right to bring that back to Buddhism, and for me not to just say that it's, not to pick on Christianity. It's definitely the case that there's fundamentalist Buddhists.
Yeah.
Maybe I've been one at one point. Yeah.
Yeah, and totally, and so like, and this is why you see people, and I've met Stephen Batchelor, and Evan Thompson is a good friend of mine. Stephen Batchelor has written After Buddhism. Evan Thompson has written Why I'm Not a Buddhist, for precisely these kinds of arguments. So these are deeply thoughtful academic people who have wrestled with trying to reconcile, for example, Buddhism with the scientific worldview, and finding so much resistance, again, about a commitment to the axial age mythology, that they finally felt that they had to abandon the relationship to Buddhism. So again, that's part of my argument. That's part of my argument.
Sure. I've also met people who are, let's say, who take on the traditional Buddhist thing 100% and find absolutely zero problem with the a scientific worldview, and also in the tantric traditions that I practice, there's all kinds of things that are done that are really I guess transrational or are not the least bit compatibility with rationality. So I guess that ties into my second question really that I had on here about rationality. So maybe we can bring those two thoughts together.
I just want to finish one point in that the point about the reason why it's also the religion that's not a religion is also it's kind of bookended. It's that for the argument I tried to articulate, many people find the attempt to go into the traditions non-viable for them, and I mean that in the sense that James meant. Like you can think it's not a livable proposition for them, and I think what people perceive, that's why it's not a religion. But why is it a religion, if you'll allow me the contradiction? Because the secular alternatives of the pseudo-religious ideologies, right? That like you pointed out in the commentary, that drench the world in blood. Those secular, that I don't think that ultimately they were purely secular, but they styled themselves as purely secular alternative, purely political. That is I think that option is also, blocked for most people. That's not an option. So people feel trapped. I can't go back to religion, but the secular alternatives don't work too. And I was trying to capture that tension with the contradiction. Like, it's not a religion for the people who, I can't go back to the tradition, but it's still a religion in the acknowledgement, well, the secular alternatives don't work either. That's what I was trying to capture with that. I'm trying to capture the tension with that and the problematic that it gives us.
Well, what do you think, for example, of a deity yoga practice where you visualize yourself as some kind of wild deity, in union with, these kind of very, very bizarre practices, which are just, I think that a modern rational person, they're effective and they're beautiful, but I don't think I could apply rationality to them. I don't think I could apply maybe I could, but
let's talk about that. I want to talk about that. That's an excellent question, because as you know, I'm not just me. Many people, and I try to reference them, we're trying to, I think, get back to at least an ancient Greek notion of rationality as opposed to a very Cartesian notion of rationality. And I think that is what we need, because we need a notion of rationality that connects us back to wisdom. And so let's take it for granted that that's a reasonable proposal. Again, I've got arguments out there for that, but let's say that what we're interested in is a notion of rationality as it was in the ancient world, that affords, right, some understanding, bridges to the cultivation of wisdom. Well then, and this is so pervasive through ancient philosophia, the notion of rationality then is not primarily argumentation and coming to conclusion, right? Discourse and argumentation work, but they're in the service of a bunch of other practices, because the overarching conception of rationality, and I talked about this with David Chapman. I got to write some, I owe him a couple of letters on letter. Yeah. That I think that the main conception there is, two things: a systematic and reliable set of practices for overcoming self-deception and the perennial problems that engenders in human beings, and then systematic and reliable ways of enhancing religio, enhancing those aspects of connection that we talked about earlier, that we now have some scientific evidence for, reliably improve people's sense of meaning in life. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about rationality. I'm talking about rationality that ameliorates foolishness and affords flourishing in systematic and reliable ways. So meditating for me is a form of rationality, even though, in fact, precisely because it is suppressing inferential processing, it is doing that in a way that is appropriate for trying to train aspects of insight that are important for overcoming self-deception.
But you probably, when we think of rationality, we think of, I guess, to ration is to cut things into bits and try to, right? And so to ration things, so we could sort of explain what meditation does and have some kind of rational explanation for that. Whereas what happens in meditation is not really something that you can measure or quantify or put in scientific. You can, but
see, I want to. Is it challenging you? I don't think the ratio and the rationing is originally to cut up. I think it's ratio, it's proportioning. And what it is ultimately much more like logistics. What is the best way? So, right, it's a logistical normativity. What is the best way of disposing of your finite, limited resources as a human being? Not about the cutting up of bits, of things into bits. It's, I have to ration this.
This is what I got from actually Ian McGilchrist's book and his critique of sort of rationality.
Yeah, and
and you disagree with that. Yeah, he was saying we need reason, but not rationality, because rationality means breaking things up into bits. And he was in the end of his book, he says that sort of we need to restore romanticism in some kind of a way. And you're kind of saying the opposite thing. And I'm sympathetic to both views because I'm kind of a romantic by nature. But
well, I'm saying that I think if you pay attention to, let's say, and I've given a talk on this, let's say Marcus Aurelius, and the Stoics, of course, are advocates of rationality, clearly. But what's happening in the practice of something like the view from above? Well, you're not making an argument, and you're not analyzing. What are you doing? You're doing this perspectival transformation that is supposed to radically alter your salience landscape so that your sense of self and your sense of identification are radically transformed, so you're capable of aspiring to a different way of being. Right. And this gets me to a third dimension of the notion of rationality that's present in the ancient world, that's lost in the modern. And this goes to Agnes Callard's work, which is the aspirational aspect of rationality. And you get that in the sense of wisdom, because like the Agnes Callard's point is that when we propose rationality, we're actually proposing to people an aspirational course, because most of us are not very rational, and we're aspiring to become somebody other than we are, to have salient landscapes other than we have, and to have sets of preferences and values than other than we have.
Yeah, it's aspirational, but impossible. I mean, I don't see myself becoming a rational person. I don't know.
well, let me try. But what I was trying to do with the view from above is that is a way in which you engage in aspirational rationality. That is a way in which you can use systematic and reliable practices for bringing about the kinds of transformation that reduce kinds of self-deception, egocentrism, parochialism, and over-identity. Like, these are all important ways of becoming wiser. And so for me, that view from above, which is very similar to some Buddhist meditative practices, is a very rational thing to do. Not because it's argumentative rationality, but because it's aspirational, transformational. And here's the bite in Callard's argument. If you don't include aspiration in your understanding of rationality, you are in a performative contradiction. Because
Mhm.
if aspiration is not a rational process, then you cannot recommend rationality to people. Because when you're recommending be more rational, you're actually advocating an aspirational transformation. The
Mhm.
aspiration to rationality is actually integral to
Yeah.
the existence of rationality.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm following all that, but it sounds pretty good.
Well, the point is,
Uh,
what I'm trying to argue, if I was to make it
yeah.
simpler, is the process of becoming more rational has to be part of our definition of what it is to be rational. And that
Okay.
is aspirational in nature. And so if I'm trying to overcome self-deception, I'm engaged in a aspirational self-transcendence project. It
Mhm.
can't be captured by argumentation because you can't infer your way through those kinds of
Yeah.
transformations.
Okay.
But they still have to be central to rationality. That's the point I'm trying to
Okay.
make.
Yeah. So, yeah. So rationality is not sort of a, it's not kind of a linear process. It's more of understanding the whole, or being,
It's yeah.
it's a, I guess, um, yeah, it's about what I guess Jordan Hall talks about. He uses this word coherence.
Oh yeah. But
That that
Jordan, but I
that
mean,
maybe that's what that sounds like when Jordan says coherence. It sounds a bit like what you mean when you say rationale or something.
I think so. I mean, I was in a way. I was talking to Jordan actually earlier this morning. We were having a conversation around all this stuff, and like what he means by coherence is exactly right to get out of, to get something beyond the cultural cognitive grammar that we have. It's a deeply self-transcendent thing for him. So it's a deeply aspirational thing, and so very, very much, I think that's the case. The thesis I'm arguing against is this two-stage reduction. Reason is argumentation, and argumentation is logic. And so being rational is to be logical. I think
Okay.
that is deeply mistaken. I think knowing when, where, this is the ratio, knowing when, where, and to what degree to be logical, knowing where, when, and to what degree one should make arguments. That's the
That's
hallmark of
wisdom too,
rationality.
isn't it? And that's
Yes,
understanding the
exactly.
context of things, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
rather than
that's
just
exactly my
having
point.
some ideas or.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
exactly. That's exactly my point. And that's what I mean about trying to come up with a conception of rationality that bridges naturally into the cultivation of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Okay, great. Okay. Um, okay, so I guess the next question I had on my list was about non-theistic religion, right?
Well, this goes back to the first question in
And
some
this
way.
kind of comes. So is that the religion that's not a religion? Is that a non-theistic religion, or because non-theistic religions are, I guess they don't have a God principle that they
Yeah.
adhere to, but they still have sort of something like Buddha nature or
Well, they have sacredness. They definitely have something. They definitely have sacredness. They definitely have symbols, and I use that word with a deep kind of meaning. They definitely have symbols for activating, accentuating and celebrating religio. That and in that celebration of religio, in its acceleration, even there's a sense of the inexhaustibleness of reality that comes through. So I think all of the religions have that, and the non-theistic religions have non-God, they have non-personal symbols. Like say the Tao in Taoism as a quintessential example, right? The Tao is not a person, it's not a God, but the Tao is, it's nevertheless something that, and the Tao Te Ching explicitly says that it puts you into a relationship with the inexhaustible aspects.
Mm-hmm.
It gets you cultivating wisdom. It really enhances your sense of connectedness of flow. Taoism is the religion of religio and flow in many ways, and so it's a non-theistic religion. I think for me, what the non-theist is rejecting, a presupposition is an assumption that's shared by opponent positions, right? It's different from just an assumption. And so the non-theist rejects presuppositions that are accepted by both the theist and the atheist, that ultimate reality is a being of some kind,
The ground of being. It seems to be that non-theistic people talk about the ground of being,
Yes, right.
whereas theistic people talk about the high, the mighty,
The supreme being,
the
right?
supreme,
Right. So it's the idea that being is ultimately understood as the supreme being. Now we have to be very careful, because even within so-called theistic positions, you have mystical traditions and theologians who challenge that. But we're talking about sort of consensus views, and so there's the rejection of the idea that, so the theist says there is a supreme being, the atheist says there isn't, but that the non-theist says that's the wrong way to frame. That's the wrong way to frame sort of ultimate reality. The theist and the non-theist both seem, at least in the Abrahamic traditions, were the ones I'm familiar with, to think that the ultimate relationship to what's sacred is a relationship of belief. It wasn't always that way, but that's what it's come to be now. The non-theist says, no, it's not about believing or not believing. This is much more about what we were talking about earlier. Am I on a course of transformation that is making me wiser, right? It's tapping into the procedural, the perspectival, and the participatory as just as important as the propositional. So the non-theist also, right? So like, is there a God? Is this a question like, do you believe in a supreme being? The non-theist says, well, I reject belief as the central relationship.
It's the wrong question or something.
Yeah, you're framing the question the wrong way. And then the non-theist also says the question about, and I mean, I'm having excellent discussions with Mary Cohen and J.P. Marceau about this, so I don't want to be dismissive of them, but I'm just stating what the non-theist is saying in this context to answer your question. The non-theist says, there's sort of deep reasons why the question of whether or not reality, ultimate reality, is personal or impersonal is undecidable, because the notion that ultimate reality is similar to us. The problem is similarity I mean, there's the Goodman critique. The similarity of any two things is ultimately logically undecidable, because the number of properties that any two things share is indefinitely large, and the number of properties they don't share is indefinitely large. There's no logical procedure. There is no logical procedure for deciding similarity. There's a deep argument there. So what do? Well, we pick points of comparison that are particularly relevant to us. But then it's not a choice about the reality of the thing. It's a choice about what's relevant to us, what's symbolically relevant to us. So I get it that for some people, personal symbols are relevant to them. And for other people, it's not. But the non-theist says,
so maybe theism and non-theism can kind of coexist. You know, there's some people who are more attracted to non-theistic styles can do that, and then other people who are more attracted to theistic styles can do that.
As long as, and here's another non-theistic point, the non-theist would say, as long as you don't confuse kind of psychological indispensability with metaphysical necessity. So what's the difference?
That's the critique.
So somebody may say, you know, for me, because of my idiosyncratic history or because of my cultural heritage, the personal symbol works for me and work in a deep way, not some superficial utilitarianism, but deeply works for me. Right? I can't do the impersonal. I get that. That makes sense to me. That's even a prediction of sort of relevance realization theory. But to conclude from that indispensability that that's the metaphysically true picture of reality, that doesn't follow. That just does not follow. So they could exist together, but you see, whereas the non-theist can say, oh, and this is the point, this is the next point, the pluralism. The non-theist can say, oh, I see that. I get that. Can the theist in good integrity do the same and say, oh, I see that. I see that it is equally as good.
I think that the theist gets stuck somewhere and doesn't go the next step, perhaps. That's what we're saying, you know.
And I think, but what I would say also, Andrew, is I think the atheist is similarly stuck in rejecting all of these propositions as somehow the answer.
Absolutely.
So the non-theist is trying to say, all of this has been massively misframed for these reasons and several others. And what we need to do is break through that misframing and get back to what's really at issue here, I think, which is the cultivation of wisdom, the enhancement of religio.
Okay.
I don't mean to dump a bathtub of concepts on people. I mean, I'm trying. I mean, I am aware of the fact that I can be sort of oppressive in the density of my thought. But I guess what I'm trying to do is
more like excessively humble, John. No, because it's a wonderful feast.
Well, okay. It's part of it is, and I appreciate you saying that. Part of it is in my mind, I have many arguments, and I'm trying to condense them as much as possible into something that we can bring into conversation. I would like to point out that what we just said about the non-theism also, because you did ask me, it plays into this question of a religion that's not a religion, because there's sort of a presupposition of that framework as what we're trying to do is get a set of psychotechnologies that is like that can break out of the axial grammar. And part of that breaking out of the axial age grammar, I think Jordan and I agree on this, Jordan Hall and I agree on this, is breaking out of the theism, anti-theism, polarization, and breaking back through getting psychotechnologies that have a legitimacy worldview that is not bound in that stagnant grammar. That's part of what's going on there.
Okay, well, there's one more question about all this religious stuff that I have, and that was, my friend Alexander Bard, who I do a podcast with, has some pretty wild ideas, and
I've talked to Alexander directly too, of course.
Yeah, and he, he wasn't buying the religion of no religion at all. He was saying we already have the religion of no religion. He's saying that that's what we have right now. That the religions are weak right now. They're not.
Yeah.
They're sort of and they need that actually the religion. What we actually need to do is go really back and find the primordial religion, or find the he calls it nomadology. Find your place in the tribe in some sense, and I thought that there's something interesting about that idea that religion would be aspirational, or religio, you would say.
Yep. Yeah.
But would be something that we don't have, or that we haven't fulfilled, and that makes it aspirational. Does that make? Seems like an interesting idea to me. So
it's a good point, and I take Alexander's. Well, you know this. I take Alexander's critiques seriously, and I try to respond to them. It's difficult to do that. He is such a, I don't know what, I'm trying to be complimentary here. It's, how Phil Spector had sort of the wall of sound in music.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many ideas coming to you all at once with Alexander that it's hard to know where to, get a.
Well, the first time I talked to him, he hadn't slept in 2 days, and he talked to me for 5 hours, and and he didn't stop once, with this wild ideation. So
So what I'm saying is, I'm deeply concerned that I'm probably going to misrepresent him as I try to respond to that critique. So I'm acknowledging that right now. So this is what I'm part of it, I deeply agree with this critique, because I do believe that religio is inevitable to us and indispensable to us. And I would even argue metaphysically necessary to us as cognitive agents. So it's deep. And therefore, we are still practicing weak ersatz religions all over the place because of the fact that it is necessary to our cognitive being and also to our communal social being. So in the sense, I agree with him that part of the problem is and Chris and I and Philip and I talk about this in the book, right? That we have all these ersatz religions and all these things that people don't realize are religions.
Dead religion or something. Religion that doesn't have something living inside of it that.
Yeah. So I agree with that, but that's not what I mean by the religion that's not a religion. What I was trying to do was, as I mentioned earlier, I was trying to capture this problem that we're in, that many people reject the traditional religions, right? And for them, that's what religion means. It means a traditional religion because of the problem of its identification with the axial age mythology. And they also reject, right, the pseudo-religious ideologies, the secular alternative. That's what I was trying to capture with that. And then, as we said, also trying to break free from the stranglehold. And I think Alexander's doing this. He seems to be doing this in his book with his idea of syntheism. He's trying to break out of the grammar of atheism and theism.
Well, he's trying to go back to like the Silk Route and all these, you know, the whole sort of again all of these early Buddhist and Zoroastrian. He's a Zoroastrian.
Yes, and I understand. Yeah.
Sort of that time when there wasn't these monolithic religions, you know, big monolithic religions where there was much, let's say, trade and discussion between all of these different schools, like let's say schools of Buddhism or schools of Zoroastrianism, or
and you have that even in the ancient world, where you have the ancient philosophical schools, right? And they exist, and again, there's a point of agreement, because I'm trying to articulate that in terms of an ecology of practices, as opposed to trying to argue for a particular religion with its monolithic metaphysical worldview, right? So in there, again, I think there's a deep point of agreement. I suppose I don't want to just be doing the move where I'm saying I think Alexander has misunderstood me, but I'm trying to say I'm not just trying to point out, right, that we have sort of like he says, we have these decadent, weakened, almost parasitic religions living in people right now, because I agree with that, and I'm not trying to disagree that we need something like an ecology of practices, and we need to get more back to the transformational practices. I guess perhaps where there might be more substantial disagreement is he, and this was in one of your questions, he seems to see this in terms of like that we need a utopic vision, and
yeah, right. He thinks we need to restore the grand narrative.
Yes,
you know, after the grand narrative has sort of died in postmodernism, he sees that we really need a vision, or we really need a story, or we really need to be able to tell people the story. Otherwise, we're just going to continue deconstructing everything ad absurdum.
So again, I don't simply reject that claim, because I think there's truth to it. I think that the sense of, you know, without a vision, the people perish kind of idea, you know, that quote from the Bible. I guess the thing that concerns me is how I'm trying to be very careful here, because he has answers for this, but I'm trying to say that I don't find these answers yet convincing. Is how do we identify the utopic vision, and how do we disentangle it from, you know, the pseudo-religious idea? You know, and he acknowledges this. He acknowledges that we've had utopic visions that have drenched the world in blood, and I'm very hesitant about that as the way of trying to create what should we call it? An encouraging vision for people. I agree that we need to do.
But you're worried that we'll get hooked on some pseudo-religious ideology again, and go through the same you know, parasitical, you know, thing.
Right. Definitely. Yeah. So what I've been trying to explore, and and this is a partial response to Alexander, I think, is because I take seriously what he said, but can we create? Is there a way of constructing, not just deconstructing? And let's be clear about this. This can't be purely theoretical construction. Is there a way of constructing, you know, ecologies of practices, communities of practices, networks of communities? I mean, this is how the religions actually became what they did. Yeah. They didn't start out. They grew this way as communities of practices that network together, and then increasingly, right? And I'm seriously engaged with that project. I'm working with people, and I point and I tweet about people who are doing this, and I engage, and you know, I'm working with Chris with that, and I work with Daniel Craig with that, and all of this. Like that's for me is okay. If we're talking about vision, for me, it's like, okay, what are the design, and this is, we saw this with Jordan Hall, what are the design features? How do we get the architecture of getting that will coordinate this bottom-up process that's already happening, right? with the religion that's not a religion, we're not trying to found anything. There's all of this is happening right now. There's all these new emergent psychotechnologies, all these new emerging communities, all this nascent networking that's going on. Let's try and bring some reflective design and architecture to this. So
Great.
can we afford it as much as possible?
Yeah. So I have Alexander's voice in my head because I know his critique of that as well. And his critique is that it's you're building the container, that there's an obsession with the container. There's an obsession with etiquette. There's an obsession with making sure that we, have good conversations and this kind of thing. But then again, he's always saying we need this phallic vision where we can so we need to balance like the matriarchal, which is the container, with the with a positive patriarchal, not a tyrannical patriarch, which is the sort of the straight ahead visionary sort of principle.
And I want to be fair to Alexander in that, like, he does, and I mentioned it, he clearly has a response to me when I worry about the sort of evil utopias, the dystopias that we've continually fallen into. I'm not as convinced about the psychoanalytic terminology as helping giving me a clear path for doing that. Is it just a container? Is it? I mean,
the container. It's not that the container is not important. It's vitally important. But I think he's saying it's an imbalance, or I mean, that's what he's always saying. And
I get that, and I get that he's very charitable about it. And he says that I should keep doing what I'm doing, and he should keep doing what he's doing. And I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge all of that. That all of that is going on, because that is important. But that goes to the point I'm trying to make. I mean, what makes people think their lives are more meaningful? Connections to other people, right? A sense that they're connected to reality, a sense that they have sort of autonomous competence. They're connected to they matter. They have a sense of and purpose is one of the four factors, but you can't reduce meaning in life to purpose. And the evidence is now coming out that purpose isn't as important as we thought it is. Our Protestant culture may be overemphasizing purpose, mattering, being in a sense of deep connection to what's most real, and a sense of being in developmental caring with others. These seem to be much more important to people's sense of meaning in life. And if that's
so, I'm thinking of Jordan Peterson now when you're talking about that, and I'm thinking that it was like a balance to Jordan Peterson's view, because he's always about purpose and meaning and getting and that sort of thing, and having an aim and having a direction and that's his view, and you're giving this other perspective.
Well, I'm trying to say that the evidence is emerging, and it's pretty good evidence that reducing meaning in life to purpose is just, I think, incorrect. And that there's other factors, this sense of mattering and this sense of being connected to something larger than yourself, the sense of the sense of participating in agape, right? All these things all matter, and there's some evidence that they matter more than purpose. And that's why I tried to argue for this.
This is the feminine again, because the word matter isn't that related to the word mother?
Well, it can be, but I'm not quite sure what.
I'm sorry. I'm inundated by both of your points of view, and I'm appreciative of both of them. I'm not trying to argue one against the other.
And I don't want to box you in because of that. I'm trying, but I am trying to articulate why I think I'm not just talking about the container.
Okay.
I think the content is meaning in life, and deeply. Because I don't know what else the content would be. If Alexander will allow me, and I'm not using this in a mocking tone, but isn't the phallic vision to get me a place where I have more meaning? I mean, if it's not that, what is it? What is it for? Right? Certainly, that's what Jordan Peterson thinks, that the phallic vision is about making your life more meaningful. So let's actually ask this question. We can ask it scientifically. We're doing it. What are the things that actually make our life have more meaning in life? I would argue that that's a lot of content. And the container that I'm building is actually directed towards a lot of that content.
Okay, what is the meaning? Like, can you say that in a very succinct way? Like, what would you say? Like, with your scientific understanding?
What is meaning in life?
Yeah.
I think meaning in life is to have these four factors. They don't, and this is the variation. This is the individual difference. You don't have to have, like, it's not like everybody has to have all four factors equally. You can have sort of less of one factor and compensate with it by the others. So there's much more pluralism here also. But so now that, if you allow me that, if that's sort of understood, that it's not a simple sort of feature list, it's a dynamical system.
Yeah.
Within that dynamical system, meaning in life is a sense of connectedness to what's real, what's significant. It's somehow bigger than you. A sense of mattering to others and to reality. A sense of being cared for by others, that other people, and this is in the sense of relationships that have a developmental import for you. And then a sense of purpose, a sense that there is some overarching goal that all of your other goals are subservient to, which is, I think, what Alexander means by the phallic vision. Yeah. And I think meaning in life is to have all of those.
I think would you agree that sort of thing has been lost, like, let's say, in the modern world?
I think deeply so.
Yeah.
I mean, it's lost in the sense that we're not in touch with it, and we don't have religio about it. We can't. We don't
have a way to channel it or
to activate it and accelerate it and celebrate it and extend it, right?
Yeah. So it becomes pathological because of that, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is that a lot of these relationships that I've been talking about, this connectedness to yourself, to others, to reality, right? That connectedness is not largely held by our propositional knowing. It's held by our procedural skills. It's held by our perspectival salient landscape. It's held by our participatory identifications. It's held by and to the degree to which we are suffering from sort of a propositional tyranny, we have disconnected ourselves very fundamentally, right, and existentially in an embodied way from the machinery of that connectedness, and therefore we suffer very deeply. And that's why I don't think ideological solutions are, because ideologies just move propositions around, right? Now, propositional theory is relevant because the propositional theory can help you, right? We're doing it right now. It can help you get back in touch with these forms of knowing that deeply connect us. But the degree to which we are just, again, this goes back to the non-theism, the degree to which we're just asserting beliefs as somehow the solution to meaning in life, I think is to radically, and not just conceptually, existentially misframe how we are trying to get more meaning in life. And boy, do we need meaning in life. We really need it.
Okay, great. This brought me to like the last question I had on my list of questions, and your series is called "Awakening to the Meaning Crisis."
Awakening
from the Meaning Crisis. So I was thinking, yes, okay, so we awaken from the meaning crisis. Well, that's a big ask, but let's say we understand the meaning crisis and we've somewhat awakened from it. What's the next step? What do we do when we understand? Like, that's why I'm trying to have this. That's why I'm trying to push this like constructive vision. Like, what would be? I love the circling stuff. It's great. I think it's beautiful. And my only fear is that you could do these sort of things forever. They do at Epsilon. These kind of activities where you get together and you discuss where you're at, and but then there's this. So I was thinking the vision I had was that there's a circle, and then there also has to be again a line in the circle.
Well, and this goes to current work that I'm doing with Chris. And also to with Guy Senstock, because he wants to create what he calls circling 2.0, right? And the work I'm doing with Jordan, and I were talking about Jordan Hall, about this now. I mean, part of it is this this idea about dialectic, and about the idea of trying to come up with a metapsychotechnology that will better fit us so we can access it and activate it better, collect the collective intelligence of distributed cognition, and like we talked earlier, ratchet it up into distributed rationality, ratchet it up into distributed collective wisdom, so that we can shepherd ecologies of practices, so that we can then go on enhancing religio in a much more systematic, reliable, and scalable fashion. And then what does that mean? Like, I don't know what that means. What will it look like on the other side? I don't know what the coherence world looks like, and this is where Alexander is going to be angry with me, right? It's
you would be saying you're not giving us enough. We need to know, we need to know like where the promised land is, you know, and we need to you know, have a vision of the promised land.
And I agree with that. I'm also, I guess I would ask Alexander to acknowledge that humans have a proclivity to jumping to conclusions and not paying enough attention to how well they have formulated their problems. And that is one of our deep, besetting, and pervasive sins. And so I'm very aware of that. And so that's why I'm very hesitant about trying to leap beyond. I do think the beginning of the answer goes back to the point I'm making. What I made earlier with you, sorry. The point I'm making goes back to a point I made earlier with you about being in dialogue, and hopefully being able to bring dialectic into this, into the dialogue with these people who are creating these communities, the network. Like I have to be careful here. There is a real potential, notice both words, both real and potential, that a new culture is being created, a new way of human beings being.
That seems to be clear to me. It just seems to be happening, right?
Right.
I mean,
and go ahead, please.
No. I mean, I just want to say yes. It seems to be happening. It just something is happening.
Right. And so my hope is that by getting a dialectic, which is both, as you said, the circling this way and also the self-transcending upward, right? Because that was both. But we can use the ancient template of dialectic, Platonic dialectic, and bring it into these new emerging practices of connecting and dialoguing and community making, because that's what it did in the ancient world. Let's use it as a template. I'm not a revision. I'm not nostalgic. Let's use it as a template, transfer it and adapt it, give it guidance for how we talk, connect, how we do the things that build culture better, so that we can perhaps build, you know, I like what Stephen Batchelor calls it, a culture of awakening, so that we can move to a place where, and we've had this in our past, so this is not some...
Where the context of the world is waking us up. It's not putting us to sleep or drugging us or turning us into zombies and all that. Yeah.
And where wisdom and a meaningful life, and where a good life is a meaningful life, not just a comfortable or pleasurable life, where wisdom and a meaningful life are foregrounded in what the culture is oriented around, because our culture is not oriented towards that. So part of what would happen after we awaken is that process of getting the metapsychotechnology, getting the dialectic, using that, hopefully helping facilitate the process of the emerging culture and oriented towards a culture focused on wisdom and meaning. That's what I would like to see. And, you know, is that utopic? Maybe, but I'm really trying to keep the balance of my cognition towards not leaping and to formulating the problem really, really well.
Well, that's wise, obviously. Yeah. Great. Well, as you were speaking, excuse me, I was thinking, you know, this makes sense, and I was also thinking about where, let's say, mythopoetics and art and music and all of these things fit into all this, because I find that a lot of the discussion out there is very heady. I'm not accusing you of that. I think I think you're also very warm in your expression. And also Christoph, to me, seems like an amazing poet. This guy, I love the way he uses. I love the way he uses language and speaks. And I think he's kind of a poet or something.
he
um,
he he wants, so take this with a grain of salt, but he
uh,
once sort of said, you're sort of Socrates to me. And I said, well, if I'm Socrates, you're Plato, because his gift. Look,
yeah,
and
I can see that. Yeah, that's
one of the
nice.
reasons why I work with Chris is
Hmm.
not only because he's a dear and deep friend, and I think so highly of him as a person, but one of the reasons I work with Chris is precisely to get this balance you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? Artistry
I
in
was
a
wondering
very,
about that. Yeah, I
yes,
wanted to
that's
ask
right.
that question actually. It's like it seems that you're just so high speed, conceptual,
Yeah,
powerful in that way, and he seems to have almost this poetic, feminine quality or something. I don't know what to call
yeah.
it,
He
but
he uh, he his he once described it this way. He says, he said, John builds the universe, but then I furnish it. And
okay.
all right.
Yeah,
And there's a
yeah,
lot in there, like what many things that Chris says. There's so much in there. That his language isn't only lyrical; it's rich, right? Like
yeah,
finding the right word and finding the right phrase isn't just a matter, of sort of its lyrical sounding. It's also, he finds the nexus point in an epistemic web, and he
yeah.
finds, oh, if I make this point vibrate, that will make everything else comprehensible for everybody. And he
Uh-huh.
just does that. He plucks the string, and
Yeah.
everything vibrates. I struggle to make arguments. He just goes ding and
Yeah.
right,
Well,
and
my
so
experience with of talking to him was really wonderful because, well, in my 20s and 30s, I was a musician and I wrote
oh
poetry
yeah,
and I was in the art world and all I cared about really was that I wasn't so empirical or logical. I read a lot, but I was just sort of
yeah.
in a foolish sort of way uh, and when I started talking to him, I felt right at home. I felt like, okay,
Oh,
this is like suddenly a person that I can speak this language to, and that this kind of person is rare. That you don't
yes,
find
yes.
people like that you can actually communicate in that way with. It was just such a breath of fresh air.
And so, I mean, he and I mean, I have other great partnerships. The partnership I have with Leo Ferraro is actually also a fantastic partnership. But the partnership I have with Chris, we exemplify dialogos and dialectic. We together produce something that neither one of us is capable on our own. And
Mm,
that if you'll allow me, the mixture of argumentation and artistry, both these terms are too simple and too reductive, but I'm using them to
yeah,
gesture.
sure.
That mixture is exactly what is needed for, as you said, for responding to the meaning
Well,
crisis.
I
And I
wrote
think,
down, I wrote collaboration as a remedy to the meaning crisis,
yes,
and maybe
yeah,
this idea of individual authorship, which is important perhaps, but also it seems to me that there's something more possible in that kind of relationship that you're doing than just the one guy or
yeah.
whatever.
I, I
That
haven't
seems to be
published.
an amazing way to work, and I wish
It
more
is.
people would work that way, or I wish I
I,
could work that way with the people I'm collaborating with more. And I think I
oh,
am doing that more and more, but um,
I have never published a single work where I am the single author. I can't
yeah,
think of it.
hmm,
Um, I just, I, in that sense, I'm deeply Platonic, deeply Socratic.
that's great.
The,
Yeah,
the dialogic thought is, and ultimately dialectical thinking, and dialectical interaction, because it's more than just thinking. Um, it's just so much more powerful. That's what I mean about, can we access distributed cognition,
hmm,
and can we get it so that it is ratcheting up into distributed rationality, distributed wisdom? I mean, can we take distributed intelligence and get it up there into distributed? Well, clearly that it has been my personal experience regularly and reliably that that's the case. That's possible. So I believe it's possible,
hmm,
because I know it's possible in my own case. And then and like I said, my best work is done with others.
yeah,
And so I think if we could get past sort of the commitment to sort of the individual author and the individual authority, because those two are deeply related, then I think that would be a very important thing. So I think you're right to put your finger on the fact that for me, collaboration exemplifies a lot of what I'm talking about. It is an exemplification of a lot of what I'm trying to argue for.
Yeah, and the other thing I wrote down is also you had this wonderful discussion with Guy, Christophe, and Jordan. And
Oh yeah.
as I was watching that, I was thinking there's something more going on here than just intellectual banter. There's something that's very. It's like a rare thing to just observe like that, right?
Well, for me, Andrew, what happened was we've done 2 of those now.
Yeah.
Oh, it's actually pronounced Guy, by the way.
Excuse me, yeah, Guy.
And that's what I mean. Where Guy wants, because Guy's circling practice is not. Guy's circling practice is deeply motivated and informed and referenced to. He's attempting to try and figure out how to translate Heidegger into authentic dialogue. Right. That's what he's trying to do. So so Guy is in there. What he's trying to do. And he's doing it in a participatory fashion, is can we bring in the circling, but can we integrate it with argumentation? Can we integrate it with conceptualization? Can we constantly move between theory and theoria? That's what he's doing. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to exemplify dialectic as something beyond just conversation. And, you know, for me, Andrew, both those times, especially the second one, I texted Chris later and I said, I felt like I was in a Platonic dialogue, like one of Plato's texts. I've never had that experience before. That's
very interesting, yeah. And I imagine that that's the way people used to communicate in olden times, right? When you would, you know, I have this vision of sort of sitting around I don't know, people trying to make decisions, and they would sit together and try to make decisions. It wouldn't be just like a parliament where this is, you know, I have this proposition versus this proposition and we debate. It would be like you would wait until your heart speaks in some kind of a way, and then there would be, you know, it wouldn't have this intense level of antagonism and competition that we kind of always are, you know, subject to or feel we have to put on, or, you know, this kind of protectiveness or.
Plato talks about that. He distinguishes between philosophia, the pursuit of wisdom, and philonikeia, the pursuit of victory. And part of what we've done is we've become so enmeshed and overwhelmed with adversarial processing, we've lost opponent. See, the idea of opponent processing is a system is self-correcting, and everything is all
like your eyes, right? Like
or
parallax in your eyes, or the
or the opponent processing between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system to constantly recalibrate your level of physiological arousal, right? And so what you see in opponent processing is a system that is dynamically, continually self-corrective, and the opponents are always ultimately committed to a shared process of the health of the system. And that was what democracy was sort of supposed to be. But what's happening, I think, and this is an idea I ultimately got from Leo Ferraro, right, is that notion of opponent processing in which the other guy, the other side, the other person, I shouldn't have just said the other guy, the other person, right, is opposing me, but they're probably helping me to self-correct. And we're working together in this fashion of self-correcting to maintain democracy, to maintain the process of democracy. That kind of model has disappeared, and we've replaced it with this adversarial winner-take-all, and nothing else matters. Right?
Well, there could be a kind of positive antagonism where you're challenging somebody, like in a wrestling match or something. You're wrestling with ideas, and that's positive, right? But it's the I guess the zero-sum game kind of.
Right. But think about the
argumentation that is bad.
And the commitment to sportsmanship. The idea, right, is I can be in a good match when I lose because my opponent helps me to correct my wrestling, right? So I should be grateful I should be respectful and grateful even when I lose, because it can be a good match, because winning isn't what I'm ultimately here for. I'm ultimately here for to become a better wrestler, and my opponent is helping me do that. And so I should express gratitude, I should express respect, and I should, right? And so because we share both, if we're sportsmen, right, or sports person, we share a commitment to becoming better, to accelerating as wrestlers, and we can both help each other in that. And so even in that positive antagonism, there is the sense that my opponent is one of the most powerful ways for helping me self-correct, and both of us are committed to the process of human improvement through wrestling, through this particular sport. I think sport has lost a lot of this ethos too. It's become very much the winner-take-all model. And
just about winning, about competition, and you know.
And when winning becomes paramount, and when the process, you don't care about the process, then why not cheat?
Yeah.
Then why not cheat?
Yeah.
Right?
I feel it's also just the way the communication level you get on Twitter or Facebook is like that. It's very subtle maybe, but it's like it's not, we're not helping each other. We're trying to bring each other, we're trying to pull each other down or something, and on some level we're spreading our darkness around, or you know.
Well, I think this goes back to a point we made earlier. Think about how truncated and isolated and restricted to purely propositional knowing you are with things like Twitter and Facebook.
Right, exactly, yeah. I mean, I guess this is a video, so we can see each other's face and hear our voices, and that adds a whole other dimension to it than it would be if it was just, text.
And what we're doing often is we are coordinating our salience landscapes. We're sort of coordinating, at least conceptually, right, what we're paying attention to and what we're foregrounding and backgrounding. And we're doing this in a cooperative, sometimes we're disagreeing, but nevertheless, we're doing it in a cooperative way of, can we get alignment to our salience landscape? And we're also bringing in our particular existential mode. We're talking about, like, we're bringing ourselves as identities also into the discussion. It's not just propositions that's going on here. For example, you asked me, about, the way collaboration with Chris reaches deep into how I work and who I am.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I hope I'm not naive. I don't think that even, like, I think a lot of YouTube, right, it can be disastrous for people.
Sure.
But the series and one of the gifts the series has given me is getting to meet and to deeply dialogue with people like yourself.
Yeah.
But the series and the dialogues and the people I've met and the communities I've met, they've been deeply encouraging to me that there is a real potential here in this medium, and in the community, and in the people and the competence and the commitment that people are bringing to these communities. There is a real potential here. There is a real potential, and it's already being actualized. And I want to do more to actualize that potential.
Great. Yeah. Me too. I'm working a little bit with Rebel Wisdom and writing an article for them, and it seems to be that I have two lives now. There's my my job, and there's my which I do for money because I have to, and because I need to survive. And then there's the things I really care about. It's almost like the things I really care about are sort of taking over the stuff that is more, let's say, nitty gritty, of which is also important, I guess, in a full life. But
and
any sense.
This is also where I hope I'm not being naive or have illusions. I understand and I appreciate, in all the senses of that word, that I'm in a very lucky position that my profession and my vocation are deeply interpenetrating with each other. And I understand that can't be the case for many people. I get that. And so I hope that if at times I'm presumptuous because I'm lucky, that people point that out to me, because I would be very happy to self-correct on that point, because I'm aware of the fact that the thing that calls to me, my vocation, and the thing I get to do for money, that they're deeply interpenetrating in a deeply satisfying way for me. And
but you must have this one pointed, desire, and you must have had it for a long time. I mean, I can't imagine, how much you read and how much, how much work, the amount of work you do. So I'm sure it's merited. I mean.
Well, thank you for saying that. I've worked very hard and very long, and I only recently got tenure after being at the university for 25 years. So it was a long, hard, hard work. Yeah. And I did have to do a lot of what you said. So thank you for saying that. Nevertheless, the fact, yes, I did work hard for it, and I think in that sense it's deserved. But I do want to always be sensitive to the fact that, people don't have my temperament. A lot of people might not have my bent for abstract theoretical thought, or the kind of need for cognition that I have. And that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be afforded good and reliable ways of pursuing wisdom and meaning in life. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I want to be sensitive to that. And my hope is that, and I hope I'm not boxing you into an inappropriate category. My hope is that being in discussion with non-academics like you helps to address that issue I just brought up. It helps bridge between the very lucky life that I have and the lives that many people don't have, such that what I'm saying can still be valuable to people who don't have the kind of lucky situation I have. But nevertheless, like all of us, need to cultivate wisdom and meaning in life.
Yeah, well, that's a very generous and gracious attitude. It's very touching to hear you say that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that, but it's sincerely meant and intended. Yeah. These have all been great questions. I'm open to more questions if you have any more that you'd like to.
It's funny because I've been going through them, and I think I've almost covered all of them on my list. There's more, of course. I've got more questions for you. One of the things is today it was interesting. I was on Facebook and I posted my article, which I wrote about your series and about the religion of no religion. And somebody asked the question is saying, what are you doing differently than, let's say, other people like that were doing at Esalen and Fritz Perls and Joseph Campbell and all these people that were trying to kind of create an ecology of an ecology of practices, develop psychotechnologies, create a religion that was not a religion. What's your particular, let's say, I don't mean to say what are you doing like in any kind of like, oh, this is the new thing, but what is your, what do you think your particular angle is, your particular, let's say, thing that you have to give to this whole discussion?
So there's a couple of things here. I don't know all the people you were referring to there, so I'm gonna use the one that I have somewhat familiarity with, which is Joseph Campbell, as my point of comparison. So if you'll allow me to use him as sort of an exemplary fashion. It may be Young via Joseph Campbell, and maybe maybe also that would be a bit of a contrast with Jordan Peterson. I think Jung gave us a set of valuable psychotechnologies, and I did deep training in those. I've been through Jungian therapy. I went through work. I've done a lot. I'm not claiming to be a clinical psychologist. I am not claiming that, but I have, and I do practice some of these psychotechnologies. I've done the same thing. 25 years of metta, vipassana, tai chi chuan, right? So I have deeply learned a lot of these psychotechnologies. I have a long, deep philosophical training in order also to work with, right, the philosophical worldviews, the wisdom traditions surrounding all of these psychotechnologies. And then I have training as a cognitive scientist that I can bear on all of these things. And sorry, this was a tremendously self-referential question, so it sounds like I'm being self-promotional right now, and I apologize for that. But I'm trying to answer your question, right?
Yeah. No, I didn't want to put you in a position of having to sell yourself. I just wanted to know what is like, because it seems to me that there's whatever was going on in the 70s and 80s and what people were interested in had a similarity to what you're doing now.
It does.
But and it was kind of revolutionary, and it kind of exploded, and it kind of deflated again.
Yes.
And that there's a kind of a new approach to these things that is emerging, and you're kind of at the forefront of that, or one of the major players in that. So I want to know what's different about it.
So what's
these new movements? These new movements, yeah.
A deep learning of all the kinds of knowing of these psychotechnologies and these practices in the tradition, a deep training in, three kinds of philosophy, analytic philosophy, continental philosophy, and we don't have a good adjective for it anymore, but what used to be called Eastern philosophy, all of those, right? And also important, like the Kyoto school, Nishitani had a profound impact on me, for example. And then, like I said, and then also, like I said, the Jungian.
I've got my next question for you. Keep going. Yeah.
But being able to bring what I think is cutting edge cognitive science into relationship with all of that. This is not a good enough adjective. With all of that practical knowledge, all that practical knowing, and bring it into a deep dialogue. I think that's what is adding depth. So while I'm very hesitant about hubris here, but while I acknowledge the similarities, I'm hoping that training, right, and that skill set allow me to bring a depth to this that will help give it a kind of longevity that the stuff in the 70s didn't have.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. So I also want to ask you just a little bit about, when you mentioned, what was the philosopher, Nishitani?
Nishitani, he wrote one of the great books on the relationship between what he would call, and I think given our discussion, we could call sort of religious transformation and the response to nihilism. Part of his argument was the West is incapable of responding to nihilism because the West gives an undefended priority to being over non-being. Yeah, and it's not just the conceptual issues. We don't have what I would call psychotechnologies of transformation and self-transcendence that actually afford the profound, aspect change in our perspectival knowing and our participatory identification, so that we can go from just saying emptiness to experiencing emptiness as the fount, the sacred fount.
As a positive principle rather than a negative
privation.
Principle or privation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that we need both a conceptual change and a psychotechnological change. And if you allow me, the way ancient philosophy kept those two together, we need a philosophical transformation in order to address the problem of nihilism. So Religion and Nothingness is a profound book.
So emptiness in the Buddhist sense can address this issue of nihilism.
I think so.
Shunyata or
yes, shunyata. But I think there are deep, and I mean procedurally, perspectively, participatorily deep similarities, not identities, but similarities between the Neoplatonic notion of the one, the Taoist notion of the. I'm not Aldous Huxley. I'm not a perennialist. But what I'm saying is that these things have symbolic, functional similarities in the way in which they can engender the transformation, the aspect shift, that deep and profound and comprehensive aspect shift that is needed for addressing nihilism. You get that, I think, in the Neoplatonic aspiration to the one, in the Taoist flow resonance with the Tao, right? So I think that, yes, I think shunyata is symbolically powerful, but I think there are equally powerful symbols
in the West.
Can do this, yes.
In the West as well.
And I think Nishitani would say that too.
So, okay, in the
And I think you even get something similar even in Western theology. I think Tillich's God beyond the God of theism, ultimately a kind of non-theism, his kind of Gnostic non-theism, I think is also, because his great book, The Courage to Be, is how do we bring about a conceptual and existential transformation so we deal with the meaning crisis. That was the courage to be. And, the ultimate proposal is the God beyond the God of theism. And so he also, I think, even within sort of classical Western Protestant theology, you have people trying to create, again, and Tillich would be happy with this word, a symbol that affords the response.
And there's negative theology as well, too, had some of that in it. Did it?
Yes.
I'm not an expert. I was pseudo-Dionysus and that sort of thing.
Well, very much. Well, the thing with, the thing with pseudo-Dionysus, and I think also with Tillich, but with pseudo-Dionysus and especially with Erigena, is what actually is at work is a dialectic, in that you're moving between a negative, sort of like you call it, a negative theology, where you're trying to shut down all the ways in which you are trapped in conceptualization and categorization. But that's always in dialectic with the insights you have and new reconceptualizations. So the idea, that's the cataphatic, right? What are the two names? It's just cataphatic and, I can't remember the two names. I wish Jonathan Pajot would hear. He'd be able to correct me on this. But what you're constantly doing is you're constantly saying and unsaying. And the answer is neither in the saying nor the unsaying. It's constantly in what I talk about, right? I'm talking about this constant evolution of what I would say is your relevance realization machinery, the constant evolution of your religio. That's where the answer is to be found.
That's a dynamic sort of unending process.
Yes.
Of sort of, potential, coming in and out of existence, rather than some sort of concrete, dogmatic, superstructure.
Yes,
Am I making sense here?
No, I totally. I think that right. The idea that that sacredness is ultimately in a completable, finishable, right, sort of absolute thing, and rather that sacredness is Schlegel's notion, the finite always longing for the infinite. That we only experience the sacredness in the transcendence. When right, and whenever we try and stabilize it or finish it, right, and this is it, then we actually lose the moment of sacredness, right? So they had this notion I talk about in this series about affectasis, that we're not trying to come to rest or completion in God, right? What we're trying to do is, God is the affordance of our continual self-transcendence, which is a very different notion. And you see that in, I believe it starts with Gregory of Nyssa, and then you see it a bit in Maximus, and you especially see it in Erigena.
The Orthodox tradition.
The Eastern Orthodox tradition has kept its connections to the Platonic and Neoplatonic roots much more alive than in Western.
Well, it's why it feels more attractive to me in Christianity, because I guess because they also work with symbols, right? And
very much.
As a practitioner of Vajrayana, it's very much a symbolic path, and we work with symbols, and we work with mandalas and things
very
like
much.
that, right?
Yeah.
And so
I totally agree. I mean, you might want to talk to Jonathan Pajot at some point, because
I've talked to him a little bit. I'd like to talk. I'd love to talk to him one day. Actually, I really enjoy his stuff.
His the symbolic world and his work on symbolism just speaks very deeply to what you just mentioned. Like his drawing again from the Eastern Orthodox, because he is that tradition of deeply understanding how powerful this symbolic world is. That's the whole point.
And we're kind of symbolically illiterate in the modern world, in a sense, right? And there's all these things going on which we don't know how to read, because we're too much on the surface, or in the noisy surface of of reality or something.
Yeah, I mean, to say something a little bit sloganistic, but I think, ultimately the relationship between the surface and the depths it's going to require symbols. I mean, because if what we're talking about is if we're trying to get transcendence, we're always moving from one frame to a more encompassing frame. And so we need something that has a non-logical identity. It has to have one kind of identity inside our frame, and then it has to have another kind of identity that takes us beyond our frame, or it's not going to transframe us in any way. And symbols joining together, right? Symbolon, it's inherently symbolic. I think we can't do without symbols. It goes back to the point earlier about, the aspirational rationality is going to be bound up with symbols in powerful ways.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think Jonathan's work Jonathan's brilliant. Jonathan Pajot is brilliant.
Oh, he's very brilliant, yeah.
And I mean, I like Jonathan a lot. I mean, and we disagree, but I trust being in dialogue with him, because that brilliance, I don't get any sense of hubris from that man at all. There's no there's no arrogance to it. There's just an infectious enthusiasm and a wanting to share and a wanting to lift other people up by basically, he's kind of like one of those people when you travel to when you're a stranger in a strange land and you get the guide that takes you into the culture of that world. And Jonathan is like that. He's the wonderful guide that is taking you into, so that you can come to live within the symbolic world and live from its power. And he just does that, and it seems natural to him. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, it is very. He does describe the world of living symbolism in a way that is very hospitable and easy to enter, and kind of and it's full of this sort of insight, which kind of I read his brother's book too, which is very beautiful.
I haven't done that.
You should read it. It's a really beautiful little book. It blew me away. It's very clearly written, and it's an amazing book. I can see that they probably have some kind of symbiotic relationship, which he's sort of maybe the more abstract guy and he's the more communicator or something like that. Yeah,
perhaps yeah.
Wow, I didn't get much sleep last night, and I didn't know if my brain could handle all of this today. But it's been great. Yeah,
I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. I'd be happy to do this again with you at some point in the future, Andrew, if you'd like.
I would absolutely love to. Yeah,
that'd be great.
That would be great.
I really appreciate that. I mean, I like what Sevilla King talks about. She has the channel Equality Existence. Very interesting stuff. And she talks about this corner of the internet. It's a pretty big corner, because I think Rebel Wisdom is an integral part of this corner of the internet. But I know what she means. There's this place where there's this forming community of people who want to enter into these kinds of discussions and really want to, not just talk, but, afford, practices and new ways of life for addressing what's happening to us collectively and individually right now. And I mean, I think that, I guess what I'm saying is I feel like you belong very, very well within this place of the internet, because I know you said sometimes you feel like you didn't quite have a place where you belong. I've heard you talk, I think, with Chris about that sort of sense, and I think you belong here. I think you really belong here.
I belong here. Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I know that when I started doing this kind of thing, it felt very strange, like putting earphones on, talking on, and you said that you were socially phobic, and I think I have a little bit of that too. But I also think there's something about me that really wants to get something out there that's sort of, so I do these kind of things with fear and trepidation and resistance and terror and all that. But it's usually worthwhile. I know this conversation feels to me extraordinarily worthwhile.
Oh, yeah, me too. I thank you for it. I thank you
So
for it.
yeah, and I thank you. Yeah, that's maybe that's where we could end, huh?
I think so. This feels like a good place for it to come to an end.